So my song will be, all I want for Christmas is my one front tooth, because it's going to take about somewhere between 5 and 9 months for the whole process. So, but it was really strange on Friday. The dentist called, and the Lord knew this. The Lord knew this was going to happen. The dentist called and said, "We have your special plate ready that has your tooth for all of the duration of your implant process, so that you're not toothless in front." And I thought, man, it's weeks before I have my surgery. Why in the world did they get this done? Well, now I know. So next week I'll have my special Invisalign plate in with my front tooth, and you won't laugh every time I smile. So, all right, Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. And we're coming to the close of this. We have one message left. And Solomon is laying out his final directions for finding joy in life under the sun. And after spending nearly 10 chapters wrestling with the frustrations and mysteries and disappointments, joys, uncertainties of life under the sun, he brings us to really a very practical question. Now that you have heard all of this, what are you going to do with it? And so as he turns toward the final conclusion, he teaches us that life under the sun can be a joy if we understand that life is an adventure in chapter 11, and life is a gift in chapter 11 and 12. And then we're going to learn today, as we continue in chapter 12 and verses 9 through 11, that life is a school. And when time is taken to work through his entire sermon, our hearts are enlightened to the fact that Solomon is not merely giving information. He is intentionally teaching for transformation. And Ecclesiastes is wisdom literature. It's meant to shape how we think, how we live, how we fear God, and how we walk through a broken world. Now think about this. Our responsibility is not to just hear observations and conclusions from the preacher and then debate philosophy and life. Solomon is calling us to something more. Our responsibility is to acknowledge that there is a difference between hearing truth and learning truth. In verses 9 through 11, it reminds us that life is a school. And the next message in verses 12 through 14 will remind us that not just learning is important, but that applying that learning is important because life is a stewardship. Now, think of it this way. Has anyone here ever taken driver's education? Anybody take driver's education? I had to sit through Mr. Breeze's driving school. And he was really the only one available in town. And so we sat through classes, we watched the videos, including Leadfoot Leonard. I don't know if anybody watched Leadfoot Leonard or not, but it's about some guy that wouldn't take his foot off the gas pedal and he would always crash and things terrible would happen. And so we would sit through that and we heard the rules for driving. And so you're sitting there, you're hearing these rules. Keep both hands on the wheel. Check your mirrors. Slow down in bad weather. Watch for blind spots. But there is a huge difference between knowing information and actually becoming a safe driver. Mr. Breeze was really good at giving driving information. But the fun part was when we did our hours of driving with him in his 4-door Cutlass Sierra with the passenger side hydraulic brake. And Mr. Breeze had one flaw. Whatever his day job was, it must have required early hours So when we did our night driving, he had a tendency to doze after giving the instructions for our driving. And that was okay until one night he told me where to drive in the neighborhood and what road he wanted me to use to turn out of the neighborhood. And it was a neighborhood that I knew well. And so within a couple of minutes, his heavy eyes closed, and no big deal. I knew where I was, and I had spent plenty of hours driving before that. And all of a sudden, I come to a stop sign, I stop, look both ways, and I proceed into the intersection, and he slams on that brake. And he said, "Did you see that car coming?" And I'm like, "Mr. Breeze, there's nothing there." He had dozed off, and when he woke up, he just instinctively slammed on the brake because he didn't know where he was. Now, honestly, Mr. Breeze did a fine job teaching me, and he gave me a memory that I would never forget. And oftentimes when I drive through neighborhoods and I stop at a stop sign, guess what I think about? I think about looking both ways, and I think about that hydraulic brake slamming the car into stop. He did care about what kind of drivers he was producing. And the truth is this: a wise instructor does more than dump facts into your head. He teaches in a way that protects your life. He reports what matters. He simplifies what is important, and he warns about danger. He's preparing you for reality. Why? Because the road is dangerous. Now, beloved, Solomon has been our driving instructor for 12 chapters. And he's shown us things like wealth cannot satisfy, pleasure cannot sustain, wisdom has limits, death comes for everyone, life is uncertain, God is sovereign, joy is a gift, life is a gift, and time is short. And now he tells us, if life is a school, learn the lessons. Because wisdom is not measured by what you hear. Wisdom is measured by what changes you. So read with me as we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 12, and we'll begin in verse 9, we'll finish in verse 11. It says, "And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yea, he gave good heed and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. The words of the wise are as goads and as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd." And so today Solomon shows us why we should trust his instruction. And in doing that, he gives us 3 marks of a good teacher. Let's look at that first one. Oh, wow, we are way back at the beginning. We need to get to like slide 500 where it says life is a school. But look at the first with me in verse 9. "Moreover, because the preacher was wise." And before we really get into his process, I want to take a few moments to understand Solomon. It's always good when taking a class to understand who your teacher is. I don't know if you sat in a college classroom, but many times you learn to take tests and quizzes in the college classroom by understanding your teacher, because you begin to understand they're looking for a certain answer and they're looking for a certain thought process. And so it's important that we just understand Solomon. And so consider with me first his identity. He calls himself the preacher. And that word points to one who gathers people to hear truth. And it's a public proclamation. And understand this, Solomon is not just reflecting privately all that he has given us through this study. Ecclesiastes is not a diary. It is a sermon from a man who desperately wants his listeners to get the message, to learn from it, and to live it. And no doubt one of them being his son, Rehoboam. And so he's the preacher. He has a strong desire for us to get the truth that he is putting forward. He also calls himself the wise man because the preacher was wise. And now he speaks as one who has lived, who has failed and succeeded, searched and observed and learned. And understand this, beloved. Ecclesiastes is not theoretical wisdom. It is lived wisdom. You can almost hear Solomon saying, I've done it all. I've chased everything that life has promised, even ignoring God's commandments. And I know by experience, even regretful experience, what I am saying. Listen carefully to what I learned. And so he is a wise preacher, and he is putting forth truth that is important for us, not just to hear, but to learn and internalize. We see also his qualifications. Why should I listen to this preacher of Ecclesiastes? We see he was a wise teacher because the preacher was wise. He wasn't careless or shallow. He understood the application of knowledge to everyday life, and he reflected deeply on life. We have seen that, and hopefully he's caused each of us to reflect deeply on life as we have gone through this series. It says that he still taught the people knowledge. He was a faithful teacher. Despite the unexpected twists and turns of life that often can fill us with disappointment and frustration, Solomon keeps teaching us truth. He didn't become cynical. He remained committed to giving the listeners the tools of perception and learning and reasoning applied to life. In other words, truth that helps us understand reality so that they could have discernment and exercise skill at living life in the fear of the Lord. And so he's well qualified to give this message. Now look at his process. We see again in here that he gave good heed. He carefully examined, he weighed, he listened, he considered as he looked at life in all of its aspects. He sought out. The idea of that is he intentionally pursued truth. And then not only did he do that, but he set everything in order. He arranged it carefully and purposefully. He intentionally organized truth so people could understand and apply it. Now think about this with me. We already heard this morning. Wisdom does not happen accidentally. And so Solomon did not merely collect thoughts. And that matters a whole lot because truth deserves effort. And so he didn't just get his context for life from Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or Fox News or Good Morning America. He investigated life. He observed people. He wrestled with reality. He learned through success and failure and regret and pain and observation. And Ecclesiastes seems to reflect the perspective of a man who had wonderful years, but awakened to and was aware of that he also had some seriously wasted years. And so he organizes these lessons for others. Why? Because wisdom is not just about our personal discovery. It's meant to be faithfully passed on. And so understand this, beloved. Life is a school. And yet so many people go through life without learning the lesson. They never look at the sun. They simply live life under the sun. They repeat mistakes. They repeat sins. They repeat bitterness. They repeat foolishness. And they find themselves saying, why do these things keep happening to me over and over again? And it's so important that we get this. Age does not automatically make one wise. Some people simply become older fools. And so the preacher is telling all of us this morning, wisdom comes when we humbly learn from God. The point is this, a wise life is built by carefully learning God's truth. Look at the second aspect of this with me, and that is a wise teacher speaks truth clearly. And we see here in verses 10 through 11 that Solomon now shifts his work from his work to his words. Why? Because he wasn't so much concerned with credentials or his intellect. More so, he cared deeply how truth was communicated. And so look at what he does. We see first that wise words are understandable. We see in that verse acceptable words. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words. Words that are pleasing, fitting, persuasive, carefully chosen. And it's important that truth connects with people. And Solomon was not trying to impress his listeners. He wanted people to understand. And that's why Ecclesiastes is filled with pictures and stories and imagery and observations. And even memorable phrases, right? Under the sun. We've heard that countless times. Chasing after the wind. A time for every purpose. Vanity of vanities. Why? Because truth that connects becomes truth that is remembered and is truth that transforms. Can I say that again? Truth that connects becomes truth that is remembered and is truth that transforms. And so wise words are understandable. Wise words we see are truthful. It says, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. And this phrase implies that his words held to a trustworthy moral standard, God's standard for living. In other words, Solomon didn't soften reality. Now, beloved, aren't you glad when somebody tells you the truth? I know it may hurt and it's not always easy, but what good is it for us to live in a world of lies and dreams? It simply brings more disappointment and frustration. And so Solomon tells us life is hard, death is real, sin breaks things, pleasure disappoints, wealth fades, judgment is coming. And why is he doing this? Because wisdom tells the truth. And so a good teacher, beloved, does not simply tell us what feels good. A good teacher tells us what is true. We also see that wise words are powerful. We see that the words of the wise are as goads and as nails fastened. The goad is a pointed stick, and it's used to move an animal forward. We would understand it today maybe as a cattle prod. Anybody ever seen a cattle prod before? Anybody ever felt a cattle prod before? It will definitely get you moving, I can say that. It nudged, it poked, it redirected, and it wasn't there to hurt the animal, but to keep it moving in the right direction. And beloved, have you noticed that Ecclesiastes does that? You see, here's what we need to understand. God's wise, truthful words carry power, and they are meant to move us. Sometimes truth comforts. Sometimes truth pokes and confronts. Sometimes it lovingly says, stop chasing after empty things. Stop living like money saves. Stop wasting time. Stop postponing joy. Stop forgetting God. Sometimes truth, it wounds us before it heals us. And understand this, beloved. Sometimes the most loving thing God does is to make us uncomfortable. Maybe you have goads that are in your life right now. God's pricking and poking and moving you in a direction. But the power of these words aren't just to move us, but we also see that phrase, nails fastened. And the idea here are tent pegs. All right, now let's not think in modern day, because if we go tent camping today, we have tent pegs, and most of them that we put in the ground are, maybe yay long, and they're just really about the diameter of a heavy nail, and we kind of pound that into the ground. That's not what Solomon was thinking about here. Old Testament tent pegs are kind of what we would imagine today as if maybe you have gone to the circus and the circus tent is put up. And I can remember one year we did VBS in Indiana, and we called in an organization called Harvest Rally, and they had big circus tents. And we set up a circus tent on the back of our church lot, and I watched and helped as we put that tent up, and those posts were big, and they were thick. And some of us had the privilege of trying to sledgehammer those into the ground, while others had the privilege of the automated pneumatic hammer that put them in very quickly. But guess what? When it got windy that week, when it stormed through the night, that tent didn't move. Why? Because those nails were securely fastened. They were driven deep into the ground. The image that he is portraying is stability. And so in a world of uncertainty, wise truth not only is meant to move us, but it's meant to anchor us when suffering comes, when death comes, when disappointment comes, when confusion comes. The joy of this, beloved, is that God's truth holds. And so we see here, truth is not only meant to move us, it's meant to stabilize us. And Solomon didn't expend all of this effort to arrange and to speak and to illustrate without bringing truth into our lives that helps bring stability. His purpose has been, and I hope you've benefited from it, to bring wisdom and truth that, like tent pegs holding things secure, anchors us in uncertain days. And so God's truth, Solomon is saying, must be spoken clearly and truthfully, and it's meant to both move us and steady us. Look at the third observation about a good teacher, a wise teacher, and we find that in the last part of verse 11. A wise teacher points beyond himself. And so after all of Solomon's wisdom, there is one final thing that he wants us to know. Don't stop with the teacher. Look beyond the teacher. Why? Because wise teachers are not the ultimate source of wisdom. Let's look at it together. And as we're looking at this, notice here, you may be reading the words masters of assemblies. And literally, it's master of collections. The King James says masters of assemblies. Other translations emphasize carefully arranged collections of wisdom. But either way, it's the same wording in the Hebrew. The point is the same, and that is God gives faithful teachers who pass truth on. But really, we find the emphasis of the passage in the next phrase, which tells us all true wisdom comes from one shepherd. Now think about this with me. Solomon may be the preacher. He may be wise. He may carefully arrange truth, but he is not the ultimate shepherd. God is. And Solomon says these wise words come from one shepherd. And perhaps he was meditating at that point on what his father David said when he told us who that shepherd is. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. And that shepherd tells us in Psalm 32, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. And so understand this, beloved. All this time that we have put in, some 53 messages going through the book of Ecclesiastes, the authority of Ecclesiastes is not Solomon's brilliance. It's not his observations and conclusions. The authority is that Solomon's wisdom comes from the shepherd who guides his people. Listen, wise teachers help us, but God is the true shepherd of wisdom. And so, if you want to be a wise teacher, a wise boss, a wise parent, a wise grandparent, a wise aunt, or do we say auntie? Is that how we say it up here? Or uncle, a wise sibling, a wise coworker, a wise person in general, learn the lesson. It does not simply come with intelligence or with diligence or with experience or even age. It comes when we learn in the school of life that truth, knowledge, and wisdom come from God. Pursue it. Pursue it in the only place it can be found, and that is His Word. So, beloved, if life is a school, then Solomon leaves us with a very honest question. Am I actually learning the lessons? And so we ask ourselves this morning, as now we kind of turn from taking this apart to putting it back together in our everyday lives and looking into our hearts. The question is, am I learning or just listening? You know, it is possible to hear truth every week and never be changed by it. Come in, sit in our pew, we fulfill our duty, we walk out, and we live life just as we lived it before. And so, really, when I look into my heart, I need to ask, have I become familiar with truth without responding to it? Isn't that easy for us, beloved? Especially those of us who have been walking with God for a long time. We kind of get into coast mode, autopilot. What truth has God been trying to teach me that I keep resisting? Am I truly learning wisdom or repeating the same mistakes? How about this? Am I letting truth move me? We're reminded the words of the wise are like goads. They move us. And so where is God lovingly prodding me right now? What empty pursuit or wrong attitude or delayed obedience am I fighting that needs to change? What truth has made me uncomfortable lately? Maybe I need to even answer why. You see, beloved, this is Solomon's purpose, and guess what? It's not going to let up when we get to the last part. Because, boy, he comes to the conclusion of the matter. Am I anchored in the shepherd? You see, life under the sun is uncertain. Storms are going to come. Losses are going to come. Questions are going to come. Life is going to be difficult. And I need to look into my heart. And boy, beloved, the world so struggles with this today. Our culture so struggles with this. But I've got to ask, what am I trusting to steady me besides God? Sometimes looking at that question honestly and answering it, we find that we turn to a whole lot of things rather than truth that is firmly anchored. Things, people, substance, experience. What am I trusting to steady me besides God? Is my life anchored in God's wisdom or my own understanding? Oh, listen, beloved, our own understanding can be really bad sometimes, especially when we don't let God influence our heart and our mind. Am I listening only to voices around me or to the shepherd who guides me? Beloved, wisdom is not measured by what we hear. Now, have we heard wisdom? Going through Ecclesiastes, we sure have. But it is not measured by what we hear. Wisdom is measured by what changes us and how we live out that change. And so let me leave you with one final question this morning. What lesson is God working to teach you that you keep refusing to learn? Good question. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me for just a few moments? I want us to take the next few moments while the pianist begins to play. I want us to reflect on what the shepherd has spoken and respond to his moving in our hearts. And so this time is between you and God. If God is dealing in your heart, respond to him. For 12 chapters, Solomon has sat beside us like an older and wise instructor. We need to learn wisdom before regret teaches us what obedience could have taught us sooner. So right now in this moment, it's not about did you hear the lesson, it's did you learn it.